Hello, my name is Kevin Wills. I'm the VP of Professional Services for Nortec Communications, and today I'm here to talk to you about the 7 deadly sins of data protection. So a little bit about Nortec for those of you who don't know who we are. Nortec is privately held, and we operate primarily in the Mid-Atlantic area where we have over 1,200 clients. We have offices in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and we're headquartered out of Falls Church. We've won numerous Microsoft Partner of the Year awards, and we also have expertise around VMware and a number of different Dell competencies. So first we're going to talk about the 7 deadly sins, and then we're going to talk about some of the tips that I've got for you to avoid those 7 sins. Then we're going to talk about the backup and recovery methods that are in use today, and also kind of compare them to what was available some time ago, so you can see kind of what the difference is. And then finally, just like to talk a little bit about how Nortec and Dell can help you with your backup and recovery. So I think everybody's seen the headlines, and it's understandable that if you lose your customers' data, they're going to be very angry. And some of the headlines that you can see here are some very high-profile cases. You're going to lose customers, and you're going to lose the confidence of your customers if you're unable to recover data that's been lost. So this is why we're primarily concerned about this. So our first deadly sin is focusing on backup and not on recovery. Recovery is all that matters, and the numbers that have been done basically show that 1 in 5 of your recovery jobs is going to fail. And it's going to fail in that you don't get the data back as quickly as you are supposed to get it back, or you can't get it back at all. So it's very important that you know for sure that you can get that data back, whether you've got it on tape backup or disk backup, wherever you're putting it, you need to be able to restore that back to the primary file system. And today we've got some automated recovery verification technology that helps us do this in an automated fashion. We'll talk a little bit more about that further on in the presentation. The second deadly sin is treating all of your data the same way. The truth is that not all of your data has the same criticality, and not all of it is changing constantly. And we've got kind of 3 different buckets of data here that we've chosen for this, and depending on how your organization operates, there may be more that you choose to use. But the first one here that we've called out is the static. And these are the ones that don't change over time. And basically this means, like, if you back it up one time, you're always going to have that current data. It doesn't change very often or at all. The second one that we've got is this business vital data. And this is the data that is required for your daily operations in your business. So without this, your business is going to start losing capability to serve its customers or to meet its mission. And the third is the mission critical. And the difference between the mission critical and the business vital is really the criticality of it. So with mission critical data, we're basically talking about data that if you don't have that even for a very short period of time, you're going to have a large amount of damage, either to your reputation or your ability to service your customers or operate your business, loss of money perhaps. The third deadly sin is failing to understand your organization's tolerance. And this is for both losing the data in the first place and for how long they're going to be without it. So it's very important for us as IT consultants, and even if you're running an internal IT department, that you work with your business units to make sure that you have the correct RTO and RPOs established. And this may be a review for some of you, but just to kind of go over these 2 terms. The recovery time objective is basically the amount of time that it's going to take for you to get the data back once it's been lost. So this includes all the time, like if I've got to go and get a tape and then bring the tape back to my site and load the tape into the tape drive and restore that data onto the primary file system. All of that stuff counts toward the recovery time objective. The recovery point objective is basically what my tolerance is for the loss of the data. So if I lose a day of data, is that going to be okay? If I lose a week, is that going to be okay? Whatever that recovery point objective is, I have to have a backup at least at that last recovery point. The fourth deadly sin is believing that one approach is going to fit all. And we talked before about these 3 different buckets, the static, the business vital, and the mission critical. And really, just to kind of put this in context here, we're looking at how it relates to the data protection requirements and the approaches that we're going to use. And with static, here we've assigned an RTO of 72 hours, an RPO of less than a day. Basically, this means that I have to be able to get that data back within 3 days, and the recovery point has to be no more than 1 day of lost data. And for something like this, I might just choose to use a traditional backup to tape and then archive that data off. As we move forward into the business vital, the RTO and the RPO are getting smaller, and then in the mission critical, they get even smaller. And you can see with the business vital and the mission critical now, if you drop down to the data protection approaches, the approaches are also changing. So with the business vital data, we might do a disk backup so that we can do backups more frequently during the day and then jump that backup to tape. We may also want to do a bare metal recovery type application so that we can bring a server back, an entire server back, so that we don't have to waste time bringing a server back and then putting the data on it. And when we get over to the mission critical, here we're basically talking about data that has to be available all the time. And for here, it's going to be a disk backup for sure, and you're going to have lots of backup points throughout the day. And as you move over from the left to the right, keep in mind that your static data is, in this case, cheaper to back up than the mission critical data. And this is why it's important to classify that data, because you want to make sure that you're backing it up correctly. The more things that you back up, like they're mission critical, the more expensive it's going to be. So if you can classify some of that data as static, then you can actually save money because you're not backing up that data as frequently, or maybe you're backing it up one time and just maintaining one copy of the tape instead of many. The fifth deadly sin is only storing one copy of your backup and keeping that data on site. So when we talk about keeping that data on site, I think everybody's familiar with the traditional tape backup where we send it off to a provider like, say, Iron Mountain, and they come and they send someone with a box and we throw some tapes in there and they take the tapes to their off-site location, and then if we need them, we can call them back. But that's kind of the old days, and we've got lots more technology that's available to us today. So when we're talking about an offsite DR strategy, today we're talking about tape, of course, also replication and clustering. And the great advances that have been made with replication and clustering over the last 10 years have reduced the cost dramatically. So with clustering, we can now have a SQL cluster or an Exchange cluster where we're actually mirroring those databases off to another site. And we can now stretch those across those geographic boundaries. It's no longer an issue like it was 10 years ago. And with the replication, the SAN-to-SAN backup has gotten significantly less expensive as well. So it's much cheaper to get the data from one site to the other. And this includes the bandwidth too. As time goes on, the bandwidth to support those connections between those sites has also gone down. So with all those things in mind, you want to make sure that you're reconsidering how you're doing your offsite DR strategy. And there's basically 3 different types of DR sites that you can have: a cold, a warm, and a hot. The cold DR site is basically like I have a place where I can go and I can set up servers and I can restore my data from tape and I can bring those systems back online. This is going to take a very long time, but it's also going to be really inexpensive. With a warm DR site, I might be copying that data over to that other site, but not really bringing anything online. So this means that in a DR situation, I'm going to need to do some things in order to bring that DR site online. And then with the hot DR site, if I have a failure in my primary site, the hot DR site is going to automatically pick up and begin servicing my customers. This is going to be the most expensive option. And you might choose to do this for individual services, or you may choose to do it for your entire infrastructure. But these are all the sorts of things that you need to consider as you go through the thought process of how am I going to do my DR strategy. The 6th sin is storing too much backup data and keeping it for too long. Now, before we talked about this static data and this mission critical data, and the static data wasn't going to change very much. So that's one way that we can save just by classifying the data properly so that we don't have 100 tapes of the same thing. But there's also technology that will help us do this, and deduplication is really the biggest thing that's going to help us do that. It's going to reduce the backup storage footprint, and it's going to allow you to save money on those disk to tape applications because you're not having to maintain full copies of the data over and over again. If you have the same set of blocks on two different places, you're only saving one copy of those. We'll get a little bit into that, a little bit more depth further on in the presentation. So the seventh sin is thinking that you're done after you test it. And we talked before about recovery is the only thing that matters. Well, recovery matters all the time. You need to test again, and test again. This needs to be a regular part of your process. And this is true of DR strategies as well. So your DR strategy is not a DR strategy that's valid unless you've actually gone and tested it. And there are lots of large companies that are actually drilling DR on a monthly or quarterly basis. Pick a service or even an entire infrastructure and try and bring it up in the DR site and make sure that it works. Bottom line, if you don't test it, you don't know it works, it's not valid. You need to make sure that everything works. So just to recap, basically the main takeaways here is, focus on the recovery and make sure that you're continually testing and updating. And there's lots of technology and there's strategy around how you're classifying the data. There's lots of things that go into that, but the most important things are focusing on that recovery. Make sure that if you lose that data, you can get it back, and making sure that you're always testing that recovery process and making sure that it works. So here's a little bit on the backup and recovery methods that are available. So everybody's familiar with the traditional backup and recovery. We call this the tried and the true. This is basically we're going to dump it onto a tape, or we're going to dump it onto disk, and we're going to use a server client type architecture, basically have an agent installed on a server. And these are really handy because you can back up all different types of systems. There's no real, there's not a whole lot of stuff that's out there that there isn't an agent available for that allows you to back it up. So it always works. You can do fulls, incrementals, and differentials, and you can create your schedules, all this. This is the old method. This is what has been around for many years now. Some of the improvements have been made around things like the continuous data protection. Now, we talked before about this data that we had to have this data available within 5 minutes. We had to be able to get it back. Well, tape backup's not really going to work for that because you just can't run that many tape backups throughout the day. So improvements have been made around continuous data protection. Dell's got some great solutions around this. And basically what it's going to allow you to do is continually capture all of the data changes so that you can really quickly bring them back. And you can do that for periods as little as 5 minutes. This is going to reduce or eliminate your backup windows because you're backing up stuff throughout the day. You don't have to be backing it up for 4 hours solid at night anymore. You can just back it up throughout the day. And these are really good for, I can't have my data unavailable for really any length of time. I've got to get it back super, super quickly, or I have major problems with my backup windows. I just don't have enough time in a night to back everything up. Now, keeping in mind, continuous data protection is going to be more expensive than a traditional tape backup type solution. It does make sense in a lot of cases, and you need to identify those services that do require this type of backup. And this goes again back to that classification. Make sure that you're classifying that data correctly so you're spending your money in the right places. So bare metal recovery, the key takeaway here, and bare metal recovery has been around for a long time now, but there have been some improvements around recovery to dissimilar hardware and also dissimilar virtual machines. So when you're thinking about a bare metal recovery type solution, make sure that one of your criteria is going to dissimilar virtual machines or hardware. And this is important because maybe I've got a VMware environment in my production data center, and I've licensed that, and it's important to me, so I'm spending the money to do that. But maybe my DR environment, I can't get approval, or I choose not to spend the money to do all of the licensing for VMware. Maybe I want to have Hyper-V out there. Well, that's all well and good until my bare metal recovery can't be done from a VMware machine to a Hyper-V machine. So make sure that you consider all of these things in your strategy. And if you're testing it, you'll definitely find those sorts of things the first time you test it. Replication is also something that's made a lot of great strides, and this has been made available because the storage systems that are capable of doing replication have gotten a lot less expensive. Dell has some really good solutions, with their Ecologic line, even that do replication now, and also the bandwidth. The bandwidth has gotten a lot cheaper, so it's now more viable strategy for me to replicate all of my data from my production data center over to a DR data center. Now, replication is a little bit different than backup because your replicas are updated pretty frequently and they don't maintain any sort of historical state. So this doesn't really work for the type of scenario where Sally lost a file and she overwrote it with something last week and she needs the one from 2 weeks ago. Well, replication really doesn't work for that because number one, replication is basically designed to bring the storage system online, and number two, you're not going to have that historical data. That's where you're going to have to rely on your traditional type backup. Now, we talked a little bit about data deduplication before, and data deduplication is really neat because it doesn't even have to be the same type of file or the same exact file in multiple locations. It can just be the same set of blocks, the building blocks that make up that file. And because of the improvements that they've made in this technology, you can really reduce your backup storage footprint by 90 to 95%. You can really reduce it that much. And this is because even when you're not writing the same file over and over and over again, you're writing a lot of the same sets of blocks over and over and over again. And when you write those over, if you're not doing any sort of deduplication, you're writing them again and again and again and again, and every time they're taking up space. So you can see in the graphic here, with that first full backup that we run, we've got the 7 little blocks there, and then below that, the 1 little block is missing. Now when we go over to the daily backup, since we've already written the 2 blocks, you can see the color matches there, we have a different color there in the 3rd block. That one's actually going to have to get backed up. Now in the daily backup, we've got the same kind of situation again. So the first 2 blocks, we're trying to write the same thing again, and then we've got the 2 white blocks. Those are new, so we're going to have to back those up again. You can see kind of as you go along there, your second full backup, by the time you get to your second full backup, there's only 1 new block there. So I'm not having to back up the entire thing over again. I just have to back up the 1. And that reduces the amount of time that it takes you to do the backup, as well as the amount of space that it's going to take. That can save real money in terms of how much your disk storage subsystem and your tapes are costing you. So this 90% here, this is a real number. This is something that people are actually seeing. Customers are implementing deduplication appliances, and they're really seeing this sort of savings. This is not just hype. Now, in addition to increasing the backup performance, the amount of storage it's taking, it also increases your backup performance. There's 2 different ways that you can do your backup. You can do it with a target side dedupe, and you can do it with a source side dedupe. Now, the nice thing about the source side deduplication is you're doing it on the client before you try and pull that data across the network. So basically what we're talking about in this graph here with the 3.9 versus the 7.5, using the target side, I've had to bring everything across the wire and then deduplicate it. With the source side deduplication, I've done it on the client side, and then I've transferred only the data that I need to across the wire. And you can see there's huge savings. You're increasing the throughput big time, going from the 3.9 to the 7.5, just by making sure that you're deduplicating that data on the source rather than the target. And this is kind of another look at that. Basically, if you look at it from a time perspective versus the throughput, something done with a target side dedupe might take 16 minutes, and with the source side dedupe and doing some WAN optimization, we might see that down to 8.2 minutes. What does that mean in the real world? That means that basically I can back up almost twice as much in the same amount of time. So source side dedupe, especially in a WAN environment when you're backing up across a WAN, is really key. So after walking through this, basically the thing that I want you to do is to go back and take a look at how your backups are being done and make sure that you can recover things. Make sure that you can recover them as quickly as you are supposed to be able to. And take a real stock of what your confidence level is in terms of how well your backup and recovery system is working. And if you're not sure, 100% sure, Nortec can help with a data protection evaluation. So contact George H. at nortec.com or 703-288-7203. That's George Hammerschmidt. And these are just some of the Dell products that we deal with that help implement some of the strategies that we talked about earlier in this presentation. So the DR4100 on the right-hand side there is a deduplication appliance where you can really save that kind of space. The NetVault backup gives you that traditional kind of backup where you've got agents. And then Dell Aperture gives you that continuous data type protection. vRanger is also sort of a traditional backup and recovery, but it deals with the backup and recovery of VMs specifically. So that's all I have for you today, and if you've made it this far, I appreciate you listening to this presentation, and we look forward to helping you with your data protection needs.